Hey, I'm Richard Lonsdale, Chairman of the Planning Commission. I call the meeting to order. Today is Monday, February 10th, 2025. Staff, please take roll call.
Commissioner Richard Lonsdale.
Here.
Commissioner Bob Howard.
Here.
Commissioner John Graber.
Here.
Commissioner Ann Warman.
Here.
Commissioner David Johnstone is excused. Commissioner Austin Walker is excused, and Commissioner Dana Allen. Here. Thank you.
Okay, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic
for which it stands, under God.
Has everyone had an opportunity to read the attached minutes?
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Hey, staff, do you have any communications?
We have no updates at this time.
Okay, for public comments, if anyone in the audience would like to address the commission, comments are limited to 3 minutes and 5 speakers. Comment on matters listed on the agenda are welcome. However, please take note that this is currently on the Planning Commission meeting, and there's going to be a separate section in a little bit for the public hearing and also on the climate portion. So the comments right now are for the Planning Commission portion, and then we'll get to the climate portion later. So no public comments. Is there any unfinished business?
None.
Hey, staff, new business, which would be the climate planning element.
Yeah, since our consultant is not here yet, we're working to figure out where they are. We would recommend flipping 8 and 9 there so we can do the public hearing with the code updates and then kind of figure out what's going on with climate element.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on then to the public hearing. Hey, today's Monday, February 10th. I opened the Yelm Planning Commission public hearing at 4:02. Today's hearing is on the proposed update to the Unified Development Code referenced in agenda item 9. I'll now open the floor for public testimony. If there's anyone wishing to speak this afternoon, please click on raise hand button or come to the podium. Please give your name and address for the record. Must be consultants. Okay. Okay, so if there's okay, Drew, I guess I'll
So we brought the code updates that were passed back in August to the council. And there was, I guess, disagreement between us, the Planning Commission, and council on bike parking. And we have basically taken the same updates. So everything that was presented in the August, I think 20th meeting, it remains minus the bicycle parking, which has been removed. Another item that has been removed is the front door facing Yelm Avenue. So everything is virtually the same, minus requiring new structures to provide an entrance on Yelm Avenue if the building fronts Yelm Avenue, and removing on-site bicycle parking for commercial and residential uses.
Okay. So is there a motion? If there's no further testimony, I close the hearing at 4:04 p.m. Is there a motion at this time?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the amendments as written.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So we can move on to new business number 8 then, since our consultants are here. If,
Oh, yeah,
Do, all in favor?
put it to a vote.
oh, okay, all in favor then?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay? Nay? Okay.
All right, and then we will take that to the city council meeting at the end of this month.
Okay, so now we'll move on to new business with the climate planning element. With the Confluence Consultants.
Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick introduction while they get everything loaded up. So Confluence is working on our City of Yelm comp plan, our HCP, and now our climate section of the comp plan. So they've been doing a lot of work for us. One thing just to iterate about this section of the comprehensive plan, it is required by state law to have a climate section of the comprehensive plan, and it is required in our grant to have an open public meeting about it that's what we're having now is the town hall. So you'll get a little bit of information about it, and there's a lot of elements to this. I know the word climate can be a weird or, sometimes a partisan word that people can say, but I think you're gonna find that there's a lot more to it than just that aspect of it. So I'll let Phil and Confluence take it away.
Sure, we have a little presentation.
Almost up.
So I'm Phil Block. I'm a senior biologist with Confluence Environmental. Been doing stuff here at Pizza for about 25 years. I used to work with Dean Markner and this is my colleague, Maggie.
Yeah, I'm Margaret Wolf. I also work at Confluence Environmental. I'm a project biologist there. And yeah, we've been working on this climate work with Yelm for the last few months.
We just put together a little presentation to help walk through some of the things we've put next slide. So as Cody mentioned, this is a requirement as part of the Growth Management Act for the comprehensive plan. So I think about a year and a half ago, they added a requirement to add climate planning. It has two primary components. There needs to be a climate component as well as a greenhouse gas inventory. So those are new requirements under state law. But what we're going to talk through today is that background. Where does this requirement come from? We're going to talk about two reports that we put together for the City of Yelm, which are both available on your website. One is called a climate vulnerability assessment, which basically we'll walk through it, but it looks at all your assets and opportunities here in Yelm and how they may or may not be vulnerable to climate changes. And then the other one is greenhouse gas inventory. We did a comprehensive inventory called municipal and public uses of greenhouse gas producing features here in Yelm. And then the last thing is policy considerations, and that's really kind of open-ended. There's a requirement that some policy be developed. There's no mandate as to what those policies need to achieve. Next slide. So the climate planning requirements are, as I mentioned, a new goal under the Growth Management Act. There was House Bill 1181 that enunciated that. As you like to recall, it was an initiative under our governor that was very interested in promoting climate issues. And so that became a requirement under that. It requires that local comprehensive plans develop a climate element with two required sub-elements. Greenhouse gas mitigation, that's for cities over 6,000, which is where Yelm Fit falls, as well as climate resilience. And that's really looking at how the community is able to respond to and manage any temperature issues, rain issues, drought issues, things like that. So Yelm was able to receive underneath with this requirement. This actually was not an unfunded mandate, which is really nice. So the state did provide funding for the City of Yelm to be able to implement this new requirement. So Yelm received a Department of Commerce grant to fund the climate element work that pays for everything we do, as well as support for Yelm staff to help make this planning effort move forward. Next slide. So this will be a three-piece slide. You can, the first step is to assess the existing conditions. So as I mentioned, there were two major reports that we pulled together. One is the climate vulnerability assessment. We did a tour. We looked at historic sites in Yelm. We looked at city assets. We looked at public assets, community centers, things like that, to see how those might be impacted. Public library might be impacted by climate issues, and also how they're currently used to respond to climate issues as warming centers, as community meeting places and things like that. We also did a greenhouse gas inventory, which I think we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that later in the slides. So those led to those will eventually lead to draft climate resiliency and greenhouse gas reduction policies. Right now, really, it's just an inventory. We're trying to identify what assets and resources you have and how those may be affected by projections that are out there, public projections for how climate, temperature, rainfall, things like that are projected to change in this area. We're right now at some of the public engagement part of the process, where we want to collect community feedback on proposed policies and incorporate that feedback. There's also a website on the City of Yelm's webpage that has those reports, as well as a little bit of information about the process. I suspect that this presentation will end up there after our meeting today. And then the last part is the climate resilience policy adoption. So this will be, ultimately, there will be policies. So there are two ways that this can be implemented, and we're still discussing with the city staff what the preference is. The requirement is that it become part of the comp plan. It can either become a standalone chapter that contains all of the climate policies, or it can become essentially sections of other chapters that discuss, for transportation, how climate's being considered, for public works, how climate, for all those other resources, how climate is considered. So we could do either, or we could do both. But regardless, we have a mandate from the city planners to make sure it's really transparent how it links together. So we anticipate that any climate policies that are adopted will have linkages to other chapters. We don't want to create new standalone requirements. The interest is really to make this linked across those other resources as much as possible.
Great, yeah. If you want to advance to the next slide. So I'll be talking a little bit more about those two documents Phil mentioned, the climate vulnerability analysis, or the CVA, as it's a little easier to say, and the greenhouse gas inventory. And so this climate vulnerability analysis really went through the potential impacts that climate change could have on Yelm, and then also discussed the adaptive capacity Yelm has. So the resources and assets it has in order to mitigate those impacts. And then took those two things and combined them into a summary of the overall climate vulnerability that the city has. And so with this climate vulnerability analysis, we started by looking at the main direct impacts of climate change on this area, and then brainstormed lots of example ways that that could have knock-on effects in the community. If you would advance a slide. Here you can see, hopefully you can read that in that kind of intense yellow color. These are the main direct impacts that climate change is expected to have on this area. So you'll see some of these things include more intense winter rain, which could result in more flooding. You have overall warmer temperatures, which could result in less snowpack, less summer rain, more hot days, more wildfire, items like these. If you advance once more, these are just examples. So of course, these can have lots of knock-on effects, lots of cascading kind of indirect effects. Some of those could be maybe negative impacts to historical structures, could be financial strain in the community, worsening traffic, more climate-related emergencies, things like that. There are also some effects that aren't necessarily negative. Like, for example, the prairie is expected to expand. I'm like, oh, okay, there are some sensitive prairie species that maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing for them. There are changes to land use suitability, or maybe different kinds of plants will grow in different kinds of areas. So lots of potential impacts. So we did a deep dive, a lot more information here. If you're curious, please read the CVA, know a lot about the potential impacts there. If you would advance to the next slide. Then what we did is that we took those potential impacts, we examined the adaptive capacity of Yelm, and we split the CVA into 6 categories. We have development and land use, buildings and transportation, utilities, water, resources and energy, ecosystem, parks and critical areas, human health and emergency management, and finally cultural resources and practices. And we divided these categories based both on the existing comp plan, and also taking inspiration from other folks, other jurisdictions, other CVAs that we modeled ours off of. So here you can see we've summarized this. These are relative amounts of climate vulnerability, so they're relative to each other. You can see that, for example, ecosystem parks and coastal areas, we found to have pretty high climate vulnerability. Where the potential impacts are high and the adaptive capacity might be a little bit lower than these other categories. And that's in part because ecosystems are large and often very land high. They don't have a lot of room to move. And we also don't know how a lot of ecosystems will change and adapt as climate change occurs. On the other hand, you can see buildings and transportation has a lot lower climate vulnerability. And that might have to do with particularly high levels of adaptive capacity in the community and potentially lower impacts. And then, of course, there's a bunch of other categories that fall a little more in the middle, maybe some more moderate climate vulnerability with these different parts of different sub-elements having different levels. You can see there are different symbols here. For example, that little thermometer is talking about vulnerability to temperature and extreme heat. That wave is showing vulnerability to precipitation and flooding. You have the little faucet that is vulnerability to water availability change and drought. And the fire is pretty self-explanatory. That's vulnerability to wildfire. So we took all of these at a pretty granular level.
And we handed out to you a two-sided summary. This one is the summary for the climate vulnerability analysis, and the other one's going to be the summary for the greenhouse gas.
Yes, thanks. So next, the greenhouse gas inventory. So the climate vulnerability assessment is this big document. Again, if you're curious about any section, go to the website. You're very welcome to read it and give your feedback. The next thing that we worked on was the greenhouse gas inventory, where we did a community-wide inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. And so this, to be clear, is within the community, it doesn't reflect the consumption of individuals. Like if you buy your apples from Mexico, it's not going to be incorporating that into this greenhouse gas inventory. This is just community-wide for municipal and governmental and some residential energy uses. So here's the breakdown of the results. We use this really cool tool called ClearPath, which is an internationally recognized tool for doing greenhouse gas emission inventories. And so we worked with a bunch of providers, service providers, and we're able to conduct this inventory. You can see that residential energy by far has the largest amount of emissions. And then these other categories are a little bit smaller. Transportation and commercial energy are kind of similar to each other, as are industrial energy and solid waste. If you advance the slide one more, you'll notice that there's a unit here, it's MTCO2e. That's a standardized unit for metric tons of carbon dioxide. And that's because some emissions are carbon dioxide and some are other things like methane, other greenhouse gases. And so this MTCO2e is just a standardized metric, in case you're curious what that is.
Get everything into the same unit.
Yeah.
Compare across.
There's apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So then within residential energy, you can see that electricity by far is the biggest emission. And then within transportation, you can see that personal commercial vehicles versus public transit is really taking the cake. In industrial energy, you have natural gas as a higher thing. Within solid waste, you have landfilled waste being the higher emission. And the other category is kind of the catch-all for everything else. It includes water, wastewater, and fugitive emissions. Next slide.
Yeah, so we're here talking about policy considerations. So the next step is to really select the climate policy planning policies and collect community feedback. So one of the ideas we have is to come up with a bit of so we've got a list of potential policy considerations, which we've shared with your planning team. We can share those with the Planning Commission as well. Right now, that's got about 250 policy considerations. Basically, what we've done is we've looked at what all the communities around us have been doing and seen what built up an option list. And we need to screen that down, work with you guys to screen that down to a list that's more manageable that you might want to actually consider. Some of them, there are 2 or 3 things that are really different ways to cut the same problem, address the same challenge. And then the idea would be to potentially put out a survey tool to get public feedback on ones that they see as better or not as good as far as how to approach that. And so that is what we've got for a presentation, I believe, today.
Yeah.
So with that, I would relish any comments or questions or statements that you guys have.
Actually, I have a couple comments and such. I read through the entire document that you folks have done. I commend you on the work and on the climate planning and everything. I know a certain degree is canned according to what the state wants. One of the things that I would kind of like to ask that you keep in mind is some of the, and here, this is just, you know, from my own thoughts, is that some of the unique things according to Yelm is transportation for one, and the distance that a lot of the residents have to travel for like employment and stuff. You had it broke down to that, you know, construction, excavation, service, you know, was kind of the in-town type employment, whereas a lot of the residents actually have to commute outside of town and up to 6% travel over 90 minutes away for employment. So between some of the transportation constraints that we have already, that, you know, there's not a lot of heavy places that local residents can get employment. And so we have to travel outside of town in order to get that. So that's going to increase our amount of greenhouse gases. We have, to my knowledge, one bus line from, bus 94 that you mentioned that comes through. I mean, there's the potential of adding additional ones, or maybe just, you know, one just strictly here in town that, you know, can help. But so there's some constraints that, you know, some of the that we're faced with. I mean, as far as, you know, trying to get our greenhouse gas numbers down, looking at being 12 tons compared to Seattle's 4 tons, but I mean, I kind of look too that with this report going outside of just the Yelm and, you know, potentially state or, you know, some conservation, you know, seeing, oh, Yelm has high greenhouse gas numbers or whatever, that, you know, I'd kind of like to, you know, have it pointed out that one, Seattle's lower because, I mean, their numbers dropped, one from COVID, which actually the report that you referenced from Seattle 2020, that on
Comes back up.
it said that the number dropped because of COVID. And I mean, it would be kind of nice if there was a little caveat in there that was why. And so that way Yelm isn't looking like we're sitting out there, you know, being higher than, you know, the city of Seattle, which also too, Seattle has a lot of conveniences more close. They don't have to travel, you know, 20 minutes to, you know, go to Target or something. I mean, granted, we have a Walmart, but, you know, so we're limited on certain things, and you know, I'd be happy if, you know, other people chimed in, but just from my being a resident here, retiring here, and you know, that what, you know, my family has to go through in order to, you know, go through, you know, get things, go to Lowe's, go to Home Depot, things like that. We have to go to Lacey, which is, you know, it's a good half-hour drive. So, and then also too, when there was a section talking about, jumping on a different thing there was a portion that was talking about an unanticipated city growth. That one of the other things that the unanticipated city growth comes from is unit shuffling at Joint Base Lewis McChord. Whenever they decide to shut down a base and bring another unit, I mean, we can end up with the influx of 2,000-3,000 soldiers. You know, I mean, a lot of times, a lot of them will head over to DuPont. A lot of them will come over here. So that's another unanticipated, you know, type thing, is, you know, is the military. And then also too, the greenhouse gases that, if I understand correctly, that was used in the Yelm greenhouse gases, some of it was actually used as an estimate because those numbers weren't available. So I'd kind of like it noted somewhere, and actually it was noted that they were estimates. So just not the fact that, you know, Yelm is this, but it's just estimates were used to gain those numbers. And there again, I just don't want us being put out there to say, oh, we have 12 tons of, greenhouse gases when there's other, factors that kind of play into that number, so.
I appreciate that. I did want to mention, so the greenhouse gas inventory, as Margaret mentioned, we used a nationwide tool. It's the same one that's being used in Olympia and Tumwater. And one of the beauties of using that tool is, one, it's standardized. It does create a chance to be on the same scale with others. But two is it gave us the chance to make sure that our estimates were audited. And so we took advantage of that. We made sure that they reviewed all of our numbers. We compiled all the information from here, but we did work with them to make sure that it was audited and reviewed before we presented you that report. So that I definitely hear you. I've lived in rural areas a lot of my life, and think it's not an apples to apples comparison to compare Yelm to Seattle at all when you're talking about greenhouse gas emissions. And we need to find the right way to characterize that. And I look forward to if you have more written comments, we can take them. I've got a half page of notes so far.
I'm always full of more comments, so. I think that's why Gary didn't come today was.
It looks like Anne had her hand raised there.
Are you ready for me to ask questions? And there was a question, really I have two questions. One is, in reading the section on both natural gas and propane, it appeared to me to be almost the same. I couldn't understand why the propane was referenced as natural gas, but it was, it looked like it was cut and paste a little bit. And I needed to have an explanation for that. But in the summary, in what you provided in the presentation, you put a category of diesel and propane together. And that confused me even more. So could you help me understand? Because I'm not aware of very much natural gas in our city. I guess there is, but I'm not aware of any. We're all propane. But maybe that's because I live right on the edge of the city.
Thanks so much for your question. We're referring back to the report just so we're clear about what you're asking. For the most part, the natural gas is talking about for heating and cooling of buildings. So commercial buildings also use natural gas to heat.
Okay.
So if it strikes you as strange for it to all be residential, it also accounts for commercial and industrial. And yeah, I mean, the numbers that we got are directly from Puget Sound Energy. So when it says, residential energy, we have about 8,600 MT CO2e of natural gas. That's straight from Puget Sound Energy, and it's what they told us is being consumed by the city. So it could be that there are some residences, maybe they're further out and they're on natural gas that aren't as visible to you. But
yeah, well, I mean, honestly, the statement you're saying makes me wonder whether we've captured all the propane use, or if that propane use is partially in the county in areas that have a Yelm address, but aren't actually within Yelm proper.
That may well be what's going on. It's just that I only can go conjecturally, is that everybody I know is on propane and not natural gas.
Well, we'll definitely double check that and see if we can get a better understanding of that.
Yeah, see, I'm in the UGA, I'm on natural gas. Oh,
My buildings, my office and one of my houses in Yelm actually are on natural gas also.
So it's us that live outside of there, John, that are all propane?
Yeah, outside Yelm is propane.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't count the same way. The second question, the
There's one
second
of the
question.
confusions with the address issue. A lot of people have Yelm addresses, but they're actually in the county and outside of the UGA, so that creates some
Okay,
confusion.
and
that
the
helps me.
greenhouse gas report is for both Yelm and the UGA. So
Well, yeah, UGA, but it's like I say, John Graver and I live outside the UGA. So that makes sense to
Right.
me.
Yeah, my house that I live in, that's propane, because that's way out.
Right. That I was curious about the personal cars and vehicles and transportation. And was there a count done of the number of hybrid or electric cars in this area? Or was there a way to get a count of that?
That's a great question. So the way that we calculated the personal commercial vehicle use was by chatting with the Thurston County Planning Council. And actually that one is a good example of an estimate because while we estimated the amount of use based on regional numbers because we don't actually have any direct estimates for how many cars are on the road in Yelm because it's a smaller jurisdiction and nobody's maybe made that count before. So we can use the best tools that we have, which is up at the Thurston County level, and then use other metrics to scale it down for what is likely to be true for Yelm. And because of that method, no, we don't know, we don't have a count for the number of EVs being used in town, but that'd be really interesting information to have.
Would it be possible to go to DMV and ask them the number of EVs that are registered in
That's a
Yelm?
great question. Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, possibly. We could look into
I
that.
mean, if it's a state mandated thing for, doing research on greenhouse gases, I would think that DMV would, participate in that kind of information.
We'll
So
absolutely look into it.
We may run into the same problem of being just outside the UGA. And yet you have a Yelm address. I don't know if the DMV would distinguish that. It might be a more difficult exercise than we think. It's just the people I know are living outside the UGA. There's a lot of folks there that have electric or hybrid cars. Maybe we drive more.
Great suggestion. I like the idea of going to the DMV and seeing what they've got for data. I don't think that's a data set that we tried to get. So we stuck to Thurston County was.
I'd be very interested in that because it's that may help our numbers. But
Does it take into account cars parked? Like, is the DMV capable of doing?
Cars parked in town?
They're saying how,
No,
is it
licensed
registered licensed vehicles that were taken into account from the DMV or?
So
what?
this is actually, these are highway counts, so it doesn't have to, the data we used for the report, we didn't talk to the DMV.
Okay.
For this data, this was data about cars that were on the road, they have highway monitoring programs where they count the number of cars that go.
So
by.
literally if people are commuting through the town every day,
Yeah.
that would be, okay.
It-
Cause we are a route for,
Yeah, and that would increase it.
okay.
So it's not an exact number of vehicles, it's an estimate for like, okay, we think this many vehicles are moving around.
Okay.
Yeah.
let me clarify your answer to what they said, is that the vehicles that just pass through town, that vehicle count counts towards our automobile greenhouse gas emissions?
Clarification, let me remember how we did this, because we did do this in the summer. I'm tempted to say actually that the ones just passing through that don't originate from Yelm might not, but I do have the report right in front of me, so let me just double check.
Because I mean, a lot of times when I-5 shuts down because of one of the bridge,
Yeah.
everybody gets rerouted through here, and that would really up our.
Counting I-5, everybody.
Yeah,
goes-
yeah.
They go past I-5.
Yeah, that would give Yelm some unrealistic.
Yes, yeah. Wait here, one moment. I'm just reading the notes on here. So okay, thank you for the clarification. The way that we did this is based on vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, which is an estimation we took it from estimates for Thurston County. So the Thurston County Planning Council has estimations for how many vehicle miles traveled occur within Thurston County. And then we scaled it down to Yelm based on population. So this might not be granular enough to know if it's a car passing through Yelm or not passing through Yelm. It is on a larger scale that's being kind of estimated down. So it shouldn't account for people just passing through. It should be based on population.
Yeah, so we took the total miles traveled and we basically said, well, what fraction of the population is based in Yelm versus the rest of Thurston County? That's how we adjusted it.
If I could throw out another thought there is that if you're gonna check with DMV and you've got a vehicle count rather than taking Thurston County numbers, narrowing down to Yelm and you know, basically, you know, kind of like call it squishy math, that to find, you know, what are the number of vehicles that are registered in Yelm? Okay, you've got the number of population that travels 90 minutes outside of Yelm. You've got the number of population that works in the construction and excavation industry, the ones that, you know, basically the ones that work locally. So, I mean, it would seem to me that you would be able to take the number of vehicles that are registered in Yelm and use the other data sets that you have for who works in Yelm, who works outside of Yelm, and then basically be able to come up with some kind of a transit number that might be a little more realistic.
We can definitely
Taking the Thurston County numbers and, you know.
We can definitely look into the data and see where the data takes us. It may come out with a very comparable result, but if it changes things, happy to present that back to you.
I would be interested in seeing where that comes in at versus, I mean, no offense, the figures that you came up with.
None taken at all. I think that's a really interesting idea. One tricky thing off the bat, I think I agree with Phil. We'll look into it and see where it leads us and if the numbers are comparable or different, in which case we'll take a closer look. And we can also talk to our resources within the planning tool comes with resources we can talk to, so we can discuss with them as well about what approaches they think would be the most sound. One thing right off the bat is I'm wondering how that would work with vehicles that are registered but aren't driven. And then also how it would work if someone's commuting into Yelm or like they're still a part of the community here. Maybe they're employed here, but they maybe live outside of Yelm, then their car might not be registered. But that said, I'm very happy to look into it and see how things shake out.
Yeah, I mean,
Either way.
you're gonna end up with.
Well, I think what you're getting at is that we can bring some more data to bear to that section to provide more context. I think that context, even if it doesn't change the number that's on the page, is still useful and can show other ways, you know, you're pointing out other ways that we maybe could think about contributions to greenhouse gas.
Because honestly, I mean, being as a transportation is one of the highest culprits for Yelm with the greenhouse gases, that, I mean, in my opinion, it would to have the best information possible to, you know, because I mean, if that can help us, you know, lower, you know, a couple tons, you know, I mean, that would be, you know, pretty good in my opinion. So
I would appreciate that as well, because we're sort of a hub for a much more larger population than the city itself. And yet we're the ones charged with trying to make a difference. So
I think that added context could be really helpful. We'll look into it.
actually, I'm sorry, I don't want to hear that. If you can clarify one thing that I kind of got confused is that I had always been kind of under the impression that regarding greenhouse gases, that natural gas was better than electricity. Is that?
The reason why it's not here, it's kind of a quirk to the Northwest, is because such a large fraction of our electricity comes from dams.
Hydrology, yeah.
Comes from hydroelectric power. So that is one of the major drivers for why that's not the case here. So in a lot of places, you have a transmission loss associated with other forms of electricity, which leads that to be more costly. But here, because so much of the electrical base is from, you know, both hydroelectric as well as, you know, initiatives by Puget Sound Energy and others to develop wind energy and solar power on the other side of the state, that's made it so that we're a little skewed in Washington.
Yeah, because there was one part that it seemed almost contradictory by saying that natural gas was less, you know, carbon wise than what the electricity was, but then there was another part that kind of seemed flip-flop. So, which is why I kind of got confused. But with the number of dams that are being dismantled, does that have any correlation to on
You know,
that? I
depends
mean,
on what they're replacing the energy source with. So if they're replacing that energy source with another renewable source, then it's not going to increase the carbon intensity of that electricity production. And so far, they've not been taking off. What they've been taking offline, they've been more than compensating with renewable energy coming online.
And Puget Sound Energy also has some, well, they're legally required to, and also have some pretty aggressive stances on moving towards renewable energy. And so they're phasing out all of the coal by, oh, I'm not sure if I remember the date exactly.
50, I think.
2050, thank you. And so over time, just by having PSC as your source of energy, as your source of electricity and natural gas, over time that should start to shift things, even if you did nothing.
It's a great point that some of the greenhouse gas stuff, other actors who are influencing your greenhouse gas production are gonna cause it to draw down. And it's vehicles shifting towards higher mileage and Puget Sound Energy being asked to shift away from some of their carbon intensive production capacity.
Are there any other questions, comments?
I've got a few. Okay, let me see, we'll start with most, some of you, so you brought up today, and I read this and I was kind of curious. You said Yelm's prone to flooding. How so? How do you come to that data? Because I talked to other experts that say Yelm soil has incredible drainage. I've lived here for 40 years. There's very minute places that actually flood. And the biggest flooding areas that we deal with are paved areas that don't have good, proper, get rid of that runoff water drainage. Yeah. So like, there's a couple of roadways, parking lots and stuff, etc. So I'm kind of curious, how are we high flood risk?
Great question.
In Yelm proper. Okay.
Yeah, that was derived from reading the comprehensive plan and reading the sections in the flood management plans and things like that reference parts of the town that do flood, and it does tend to refer to areas that are paved, like Ball Hill Road. I know can have, at least learned that it can have some flooding issues, and so that's mostly derived from reading reports like that discuss certain areas that, yes, that are paved or have had their drainage impacted. Because I also learned about how the soils here do absorb water. So it's I think it is a bit of both. There is really great drainage, and then there's still areas where if it's paved, that drainage can't occur. And because usually there's good drainage in other areas, the flooding there might be harder to manage because there's no other infrastructure in place to help it drain, because usually you can rely on the soils to drain that flooding water.
Well, all I'm thinking is it might deserve similar caveats to what we discussed before, adding some of that these are localized areas. This isn't citywide, at least that's my understanding. And that might help modify some of that so that it's not as much of a concern.
And actually, if I could throw a caveat on that, I know what you're talking about on some of it, because I actually referred to it as well, because it's like talking about the bus barn as well, that, being right on the edge of the flood zone and stuff like that. Some of it that was talking about the 100-year flood. And what I ended up referring to was the FEMA flood map. And what it showed in those areas that I think that you're referring to was more the 100-year flood. And not the stuff that happens regularly, but kind of the stuff that's kind of the exception to the rule that happens, once, every so often, but
That doesn't make it high compared to a low.
Yeah,
Where's
yeah.
that? How do you I do that?
So, but
Do you, so I read through a lot of those proposals. Do you do a cost benefit analysis? Because some of those are going to cost businesses, some of your proposals I read through cost businesses tens of thousands of dollars for very little benefit.
Which proposals are you talking about?
So one particularly that stood out to me was,
Are you seeing the spreadsheet? Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, because
Yeah, like which ones?
the
These are
reports
just
don't have the
reports.
proposals in them, but we.
yeah, so on the website, it was put on, a list, there was like 15 pages.
That's the long list that I was talking about.
The long
right?
list,
You
yes.
tear it down.
Yeah, there you go. And so one that particularly stuck out to me because it hit me personally here recently was, if you were to sell a business, they would have to upgrade to the current energy code. And that's tens of thousands of dollars, because I personally experienced that, because I wanted to upgrade my building, but I couldn't afford it. It was $35,000. And went from, before COVID, it was going to be 18. And I was like, I really can't swing it right now, because I bought the building. I wanted to update it. And then I was like, okay, give me some time, because I have to put some other things into building. And then when I came back to him, he's like, oh, the energy code just changed and now it's 35,000. I'm like, you jumped $15,000. Like, I can't do this. Like, I want to make my building better. Now one of your policy proposals is that would be mandated. And that's a huge expense to small businesses. Like, somebody's building a new business, like, Costco comes in, it's all gonna be new, all that for it. But for the people that are trying to buy and get into, establishing a business, I mean, that's a huge expense that have to take on. So where's the cost benefit?
I'm really glad you brought this up, because so just to be clear about the context of that menu of measures that we put on there, those aren't necessarily like, there's no world in which Yelm would adopt all of those. Those are actually taken directly from Thurston County, just as an example. Thurston County, they have a plan for all the policies they might enact for similar issues as Yelm was having. So this is just it's like a menu at a restaurant where we're saying, oh, hey, Thurston County has a bunch of ideas. Maybe we'll take these, see if any of these work for us. And so right now that is a huge long list that we are still in the process of paring down. And then the next step too, as Phil mentioned at the end of our presentation, is that once they're pared down, then we'll put it out a survey. And then people like yourself can go on and say, actually, no, like this one would really be a bad idea. I don't think that's worth it. And then vote it down and vote other ones up if you so choose.
But yeah, but back to my point, is there a cost benefit analysis conducted to see like, yeah, this is worthwhile, or these are ideas thrown up, because I have a million ideas too. But it's like, these are affecting people's lives, like, is it worth it?
I understand. I hear where you're coming from. There's not a formal cost benefit analysis at this stage. There are lots of opportunities to provide feedback on that. And what I'm hearing you say is, well, some of these need to do a cost benefit analysis, because I don't think that's going to have very much benefit for my community. And that's great feedback for us to hear. And we can definitely work with the state staff to figure out, if there's subset of those. We're not going to have a ton of data that's localized. I mean, that's always the challenge here, is you don't want to spend so much money trying to pull together a study to justify something that it doesn't make sense. So we want to make sure that we're doing things that make sense, things that are tried and tested in other places. And we might be relying on cost benefit analyses that have been done in other places or done at a national scale or things like that, to try to base these decisions. Because a lot of these things have been evaluated by EPA or other agencies to try to say, oh, well, here's what the potential benefit is. I haven't looked at those specific to that energy thing. But like Margaret said, at this point, we're trying to get our arms around, we're at the brainstorming stage. Put everything up on the wall, figure out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, sort them into categories, and then let's focus on the ones that make sense. And if there's some of those, when we get through another phase or so, where we say, hey, we really need to understand how much greenhouse gas or how much climate risk is actually going to protect us here in town. Then make sure that happens before you adopt them. But there's 3 or 4 steps to this. This isn't there's not a plan there's not a set of proposals that's going to get implemented tomorrow. Right. Just describe, we wanted to share that list of proposals, but we recognize it's huge and it's a lot. And like I said, some of them are kind of like 3 ways to slice the same, do the same thing. And so there's probably one of those that makes sense for Yelm. And we haven't actually set what the goals Yelm's trying to achieve yet are. Obviously, we've heard that Seattle is going to have different goals than Yelm's going to have, and that makes a lot of sense. We're not going to want to set the same goals for both places, but there's a goal setting phase, there's paring back that list, and then we can start getting to the point where we talk about how we actually certify that this is the right thing, the right policy to move forward with.
Yeah, so yeah, that's why I have to say to some of those proposals, because some of them are good and some of them are like, we don't do this already. Some of those I read through,
We're like, this just makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense, but some of them are like, that doesn't make sense because of the cost is not worthwhile, like, no, we just want all the ideas out. Cause one of my concerns is, yeah, okay, you throw all these policies, yeah, there's a lot, it sounds good. Man, sounds good, but in actuality, in practice, it's not, well, then that could lead to regulations enacted. You know, when you lay those out in a comprehensive plan, eventually that will boil down to, okay, now we have this regulation in place and because we have this comprehensive plan that we have to stick to. And that's one of my main concerns is, you know, right now in the idea phase, like you say, we are. You know, like, no, let's not put those ideas on the board where we have to like abide by things that that's not gonna be worthwhile, you know, once it boils down to actually regulation time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would actually agree with you that, I mean, once we get to a point to where we're starting to say, okay, let's put this in writing and make this, then at that point, then we can say, okay, well, let's look at the cost benefit of this. You know, how is it going to affect, you know, the residents? How is it going to affect business owners? How is it going to affect city, you know, taxes, you know, things like that. Once it gets to that point, then we can start looking at it and deciding before we jump on it and say, oh yeah, this is a great idea. And then, you know, later down the road, we go, oh, oops.
But still,
You know.
And we've all seen policies that sounded good in the classroom somewhere and they don't work in the field. And that's where your feedback as a business owner is right on. We got to make sure that it works. The worst thing we could have is to have something where we all agree on the goal and we totally disagree on how to get there.
Right. Yeah, well, you know, speak to that, the rainwater collection, that's a funny thing, you know, talk about flip-flopping, like, it sounded good, like, you know, because that used to be illegal to collect rainwater. And I saw it in one of the proposals, it said, you know, collect rainwater. I'm like, well, that used to be illegal to do, and now you're recommending like, hey, we should do this. And it's kind of one of those funny things, like, you know, they kind of flip-flopped on.
I know she's got.
Okay, just on that topic, I think I hear you saying that, let's see what fits, you know, we got kind of have some choices potentially down this road. Is there a situation which none of it works? And I'm very hypothetical in this, obviously, but if it's really picking and choosing things that fit our community. I know I'm in the building and remodel industry, and there's several things that the state implements that genuinely don't fit and
Legislation moves forward before the building can actually keep.
fair enough. Yep. So there's costs associated along the way. And so I appreciate the conversation right now. I'm saying that there's the ability to pick and choose things that will fit. But when the rubber meets the road, is that in all actuality truth? Or is it like we will have things that are going to be adopted regardless of the input at some, if
There will
nobody
be
shows-
goals that are adopted as part of this, and there will be policies adopted to try to achieve those goals.
Yeah.
And exactly what that process looks like is up to the city to figure that out, but there do need to be goals. And the state law says you have to set goals and have to have policies that have a reasonable chance to get to those goals.
Yeah.
So that's where we're gonna end up stuck. And we wanna, you know, I think we all wanna make something that works for our community here, for your community, I don't live in Yelp.
That's the big thing. I think that works is a big thing that I'm so like in building, for instance, there's this desire to make affordable building. And with every new regulation, every new, we can have a wish list that's a mile long, but once the implementation comes into place, people are getting priced out of houses every day. How is this different than what's already taken place in other building industries as this gets further down the road? How is this different? How is this gonna,
Sustainable in another way.
to the question he asked, also like the economic impacts of this, there should be equal studies done if the state's working on doing studying on the benefits of eliminating greenhouse gases, there should equally be the same effort put into the economic impact that's going to have in our community. So.
The wisdom of the legislature is strange sometimes.
First, thank you for what you're doing, and it's important. I know it's a balance, and I'm here, I'm a resident. I just here as an advocate, for nature and some of the wildlands. So I had a point, if I could take 30 seconds, I'm just curious if you're using this element in your data because it really speaks to the amount of wildfires we have here and, and that concern. Because on average, 40% or more of the precipitation over land originates from evaporation and transpiration from water from vegetations. So forests like the Amazon and the Pacific Northwest don't just merely grow in wet areas, they actually create and maintain the wet regions and wet areas upon which they grow, and they increase rainfall, and they also lengthen the dry season. So I see that you have, the ecosystems are, a high threat here, or a high concern or as far as vulnerability. And trees and forests increase rainfall through their fungal spores, pollen, bacterial cells, other particles they release into the atmosphere. Atmospheric moisture condenses when the air becomes saturated and it creates more rain. But when vegetation gets cleared, I know that Yelm is planning a lot of development and, and we need to keep that balance. But I'm curious, do you take that into account or take even just nature and trees and the wildlands and how much they actually help with precipitation and cooling temperatures and mitigating fire? Because trees actually create more moisture, but if we clear or develop, then we create drier conditions, more wind and more heat, and that creates more of a wildfire concern. So I'm curious if you take the natural lands that Yelm has a lot of beautiful areas into account, but also then, if they're going to develop it, wouldn't that raise our emissions and our, as far as carbon storage and then also fire concerns?
Yeah, it certainly can. So one of the challenges, Growth Management Act is full of contradictions. So one of the things about Growth Management Act is that it's trying to account for a growth projection for population and put it in the cities. And so a significant chunk of that is projected to come to Yelm. So that creates one challenge. Where do you put all those people and how do you manage that? Where do you house them? How do you find them affordable housing so that they're not priced out of the community? The other thing that I found personally really strange is most of the state is saying, oh, we want to get tree canopy. We want to, that's our solution. And that's a great solution. You're the jewel of the prairie. So this has historically been a prairie, and indeed some of the endangered species around here are prairie dependent. And so that's a bit of an awkward solution to suggest, to say, oh, we're gonna try to increase tree canopy, and that's gonna be the only solution we go for. So it's that in particular is gonna be a challenging balance, I think. There is an interest in preservation of natural features and natural ecosystems and maintenance of that, but exactly how that plays out, one, it's up to you guys as a community to help figure out what that goal should be. And two, like I said, the whole state's like, we need to get more tree cover in our cities. That's the solution that'll help us with stormwater and everything else. You guys are a natural prairie here, partially because of those soils that drain so well in a lot of the area, and some other things. And so that creates some weird pulls and pushes that are going on right there.
Well, there's a considerable amount though of trees and wooded areas though, that why wouldn't you at least keep those instead of clear those and develop those? Maybe there's a way to develop around.
All I'm saying is that setting goal setting around tree cover is just a weird thing for a city like Yelm because it's a historic prairie.
I'm just curious if you can use nature to, to help support your agenda as opposed to. In the climate vulnerability assessment too, in the ecosystem section, we also do discuss what the natural features bring to the table and how they help mitigate the climate vulnerability of the area. We even discussed a little bit, there's not about forests, but in this case, the example we use is about streams, how stream restoration can actually really help mitigate flooding risk and other things like that. And so that is addressed and discussed totally on the same page as Phil, like, well, there's a lot of forces that are working in different ways and pushing and pulling. So it is up to Yelm to decide how they want to plan and how they want to utilize those natural features in order to achieve the goals that you guys have in climate planning. But at the very least, those natural features are addressed and kind of showed. It's like, oh, when we try to increase their function, the ecological function that these features have in the landscape, it does help with these is planning for climate. And another thing too is we also draw on information from the priority habitat and species database, which is maps out parts of Yelm and surrounding areas to say, oh, this is a really important area for prairie dogs, and this is a really important area for waterfowl. Yeah, bog first, yeah, not prairie dogs. And that information is also incorporated and taken into account of like, okay, well, this is a really important area for something, and that's important to the society because it helps with this. We'll plan accordingly.
Do you use trees to actually help with the, you know, heat island issues? And I mean, and the significance, I mean, by 10 to 15%, they can lower the heat, you know, and the temperature levels. I would think that would make a huge difference, wildfire and just.
What I'm hearing you say is that should be a goal, and talking to the planning folks who are gonna help refine that set of goals and say, hey, where possible, let's use natural features to promote these climate resilience and greenhouse reduction things. I think that is a great way to approach that, and that builds it in as a strategy, kind of saying, well, let's look at those first. And then if we have to go to engineering solutions, let's do that as a secondary approach. And that's how I would approach your comment and see if that resonates with you and with you up there.
You're welcome to attend any of the planning commission meetings, and, you know, we can always try to get that in, because I mean, we're in the process of doing the comprehensive plan. I mean, it's not going to be published for a while yet. So, I mean, that if you've got some ideas, things like that, we can always work to try to, you know, have some type of inclusion on that. So
Appreciate that. And it raises the property values by 15% or more with trees and beautification for Yelm. So I think hopefully it can be a win-win.
but I mean, your third Wednesday every month, you know, 4 o'clock.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to answer my question. I was a little long-winded.
No, these are key questions, and it takes a while to pull this information together, but it will also kind of be the rules of the road for a while. And you know, as you guys are familiar with dealing with the comp plan update, these rules stay in place, and they kind of keep building on top of them and adding some more to them.
I wanted to comment first about a comment that you made about it increases people's property value. I can tell you, as a property owner, a couple of business property as well as a homeowner, the last thing I want is my property value to go up, because what that means is I'm paying more taxes. You know, I live in a house that I paid less than $150,000 for. It's worth $500,000 now. I haven't done anything, but my taxes have gone up significantly. So that's really not a good argument. I wanted to let you guys know, and I'm listening to what you're saying, and I heard you mention the state of Washington wants the state of Washington. I think there's a bit invisible line that runs between us and the west side, and we're more so with the people on the right side of this country, or this state, excuse me. This state's not completely covered in trees. More than half of it is farmlands, you know, mountains, things without a lot of vegetation. So I don't find that a viable argument. I'm concerned about, and this is, I'm 55 years old. I've been watching this my whole life. I remember when I was in high school, we needed to prepare for a mini ice age that was coming. That never came. You know, there's been so many things in my life that we need to be prepared for this. We need to spend more taxpayer dollars on preparing for something that might happen. That's a prediction or a trend or somebody's potential idea of what could happen or you know what could take place. I know the state of Washington makes a lot of decisions that the citizenry that I represent here in Yelm don't agree with. You know, there's a lot of things going on right now that the majority of our community that I speak with are kind of going, whoa, wait a minute. For example, how are parents not supposed to know exactly what's going on with their kids immediately? The state pushing for 48 hours to make decisions. And my concern is there's a lot of, all of this costs money. All of it does. And reading through, light reading here, a lot of this stuff has absolutely nothing to do with it. Flooding in Yelm. I mean, that's seriously, Cody, when was the last time Bald Hills Road flooded?
2019 or 18, when they had that. Yeah, that's the last time I can remember.
Sure.
6 years ago.
And we've taken steps to mitigate that problem and deal with it as a city. So what I'm concerned about is, the overreach of the state government telling us, with no idea what we're doing here, coming in with all these ideas. Oh, we're going to make everything wonderful over there. This isn't. We're not asking for that. And what we're getting is, as this gentleman mentioned, this young lady over here, once these hit a certain level, then all, it just kind of starts gaining momentum, and before you know it, especially if you have, powers that be that aren't really paying attention and making good decisions based off of factual information that they're receiving, based off of things that are predictions and trends and speculations. That's a slippery slope. Bad decisions get made. As my colleague here also mentioned, rainwater. It wasn't that long ago that you could get in big trouble for collecting your rainwater. Now it's a suggestion. We all went, most of us, I believe, got a letter in the mail this summer about, hey, please try not to use so much electricity, cooling your houses. But we're gonna keep pushing for more electric cars. I mean, and we're gonna, as this gentleman mentioned, we're gonna take out dams and we're gonna start using wind power. I mean, these are just ridiculous speculations and ideas that there is no evidence to indicate, other than something that can be manipulated. And somebody said, no, it says right here. If you read back to page 346 on this information, we spoke to some expert out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, that is sure that this is gonna work for us up here. And you mentioned Tumwater, Olympia, Seattle. I worked with a mayor here at one point when I was early in my career in that area, who said very clearly, it's important for us to know what these other communities are doing. But by no means does it mean that's what we need to be doing. An example of this is the bike rack question that started out this whole meeting when I got here. We talked about that, and the idea was let's make every business, have a bike rack in front. Well, why? As a business owner, there's nobody that comes to my business on a bicycle, and if they do, they can put their kickstand down and chain it up to my gate out front if they want to. There's plenty of opportunity. I don't need the city, the state, any sort of municipality coming in and dictating what we're Americans. We're not here because, we're not proud Americans because we need somebody to continually tell us what we're doing and, shame us for doing things that they believe are wrong. And I think this is kind of an indication of that. You're having a meeting where you're here to provide information for the public at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Monday, the day after the Super Bowl. And and you thought people were going to show up. There's a whole lot of this community that's interested in this conversation. They couldn't be here. It's frustrating to listen to all of this and with just this 10,000 foot view and this confidence of we know what we're talking about. It's if you want to know what's happening in the city of Yelm, there's people that have been living here for 75 years. They're more than interested in it and want to come and talk. But then, you hit them at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday. That's just
not the only time we'll be here.
I understand.
And there's plenty of opportunity to participate online or emailing us at, planning@yelmwa.gov. Like, we're trying to make it as accessible as we can.
Drew, everybody's busy. Everybody has responsibilities. Everybody's got a headache. The last
And anytime
yes,
and meetings aren't gonna catch everybody. Like, we understand that. So we're trying our best to reach out.
I understand.
So
when you come with this much, hey, look, here's a sprawling possibility of what could happen but you have to put in the comprehensive plan, but you don't have to follow it. It's not mandated. Well, then why are we going through this exercise? I mean, if it's not mandated,
There is a mandate to do the hard look.
Okay, and if we don't, what happens then?
Well, you can found out of compliance.
Okay, at which point, what would happen?
lose state grant funding.
I think that would, you'd probably be funded by the state.
We would lose state grant money.
I'm sure.
So we would lose the authority to be able to issue permits for your city. You would be out of compliance with all state laws at that point.
Who's implementing these, who's coming over, who's coming here and telling us that you have to do this? What's gonna happen if we don't, is what I'm asking. You say, so the department, that we can go to the federal government.
Okay. I'm gonna interrupt you there. Okay, one, I think that's out of his purview.
I understand.
I
apologize for being frustrated.
Let me readdress something, is that in what I've addressed is that I've tried to make it clear that Yelm is that we're special. I mean, we're our own little hub here, as Ann had said, that there's things that pertain to us that don't pertain to other people.
Absolutely.
So going forward on this, that we want to look at everything and not add a bunch of extraneous things that's gonna end up driving up our taxes or, you know, I mean, personally, I don't volunteer to come here and look at a bunch of stuff just for my health. You know, I want to do it for the betterment of my community. I want to do it for, you know, the different residents that live here. That's why I volunteer here, is to try to help make things better, just the same as you folks do. So my point in addressing them is that I just want to make sure that Yelm has going forward what we need and not a bunch of extraneous stuff that's, you know, imposed on us.
I agree.
But maintained within the state requirements. If that helps alleviate
My
what,
concern is, as I mentioned, it starts gaining momentum, and before you know it, it's out of our hands. Well, you know, we told you this was gonna happen, and we had several meetings about it. It was in all this literature, but who's got, I mean, I know all the information I've got to go through beyond this. I mean, that's a lot of.
I printed it off, just for the sake that I would be informed.
Yep.
When I was sitting up here in front of all of you asking questions. So by doing that, I have education and sustainability, regional and community planning. So, you know, which is why I chose to take the chair position when Carlos retired. Okay, I want to try to do things better, you know, I mean, to help improve the community. I mean, I knew, you know, I was following up on, you know, Mr. Crossman's posts and stuff like that, you know, following up on different things that were going on, being said, you know, concerns.
Yes, sir.
I have the same concerns. I mean, I'm a resident taxpayer, you know, I mean, I'm not a business owner here, but at the same time, I wanted to try to address things that I knew that you folks were gonna want it, you know.
And I applaud that.
So, but anyway, we're kind of getting off track here,
The
so,
only comment I make is in.
I had a comment I wanted to share with.
oh,
So take a hard look, see if there are things you can do to make sure that you're doing the best you can here. A lot like the same reason why you get a home inspection before you buy a house. You haven't looked at these things in a while, make sure you go through and look at them all, take a systematic way of reviewing it. That's what this is. At this point, like we said, there's no proposal to implement anything. What we've done to date is we've done the assessment. We've said, hey, here's where it is. I'm hearing caveats we need to add to it. I'm hearing considerations we need to make. Well, maybe it doesn't flood there as often as some of the reports we looked at suggested it might. We'll make those. I think that those are good improvements. That puts you in a position to be successful, whatever this planning process comes out with.
I've got one more question here.
There too.
I wanted to bring up, it's been a little bit, maybe 6-7 months ago. But us as commissioners, we had a shared meeting with the county commissioners at the county center down there, where they do the permits and all that stuff. And the reason we were invited down to be part of it, because there is discussion that's going on where they're going to annex these urban growth areas into the city limits of Yelm. Okay, now we don't know the exact date, but based on the discussions we had down there, and Ann was down there at the same time. They gave us a general statement. It could be 2, maybe 3 years. So when you're putting these trends and predictions together, and we're inside the Yelm proper, are those things automatically going to relate to?
We looked at Yelm and the UGA, so.
Yeah, so, you know, to include the urban growth areas, do we have to go back and kind of reinvent the wheel and go through this again?
Nope. This is intended to be valid for at least 30 years. I mean, that's where we're trying to look. The urban growth areas are looking 30 years out. This planning process looks 30 years out.
May I interject something? Just briefly, is that I think what we're hearing from our participants today in the open meeting is that we really need to seriously consider the economic ramifications of any policies that we put together in our comprehensive plan. We want to address the climate change as it's happening, but we want to address it in a way that is reasonable and effective for Yelm. So we're going to need to have some more meetings later on when we actually drill down to determine which of these potential policies that are listed that we would consider incorporating, and then bring people together possibly over a weekend at the community center to go through this. That's what I'm hearing from people in the audience, is that we need to have input on the policies that we are just presented with a list of today. We haven't considered whether or not we're going to incorporate them at all. We need to move forward and do some additional public meetings as we refine those into the proposed, what would we really consider dealing with?
Expand on that and say that it would behoove us as the council, as well as you folks on the planning commission, to have some meetings together, some opportunity to, sit down and get an idea of, where exactly.
Like a working group?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because people are concerned, and that's there's a very good reason for that. Having things imposed on one, particularly on businesses, to upgrade or to make changes based on things that don't seem reasonable to them. We need to consider where they're coming from. But it's not tonight. We're just looking at the laundry list of what is possible.
Yeah, and tonight was really about the assessment, the work we've done to date to prepare you to start thinking about any future proposals and goal setting. So I completely agree that there should be a second step to this that comes back after proposals are kind of brought down to a short list, and think about how those might work.
Yeah, and I actually support the idea of a joint working group with the city council, because I mean, it's going to eventually go through the city council anyway, so we might as well just work together, ahead of time, and, save some time in the, process. So that's what I mean.
But there'd be another open meeting, at least one, if not more. Yeah. And like you said, Monday after the Super Bowl it's a tough one, as I'm not there yet. I'm doing this from my car, so.
Well, we really appreciate those who were able to make it here today. I know Mondays are never anybody's favorite day of the week, but really appreciate the feedback and the candor which was provided. Thank you.
I really appreciate your coming down from Seattle. So.
I'd live here if I could.
I used to work up in your neighborhood, so. Okay.
Thank you.
Any additional questions before they leave, or? Okay. Any subcommittee reports?
I'll wait. I'll go back to the public hearing.
Oh, okay. Closed on the public. Oh,
There were two items.
The grading and clearing review. Okay. Okay, so I got to do the open hearing again for the second one.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Okay, today's Monday, February 10th. I opened the Yelm Planning Commission public hearing at 5:18 p.m. Today's hearing is on the proposed grading and clearing review permit referenced in Agenda 9. I'll now open the floor for public testimony. If there's anyone wishing to speak this afternoon, please click on the raise hand button or come to the podium. Please give your name and address for the record. If there's no testimony, I close the hearing at 5:19 p.m. Is there a motion is that approved?
Do you want to go to the,
What's that? Go ahead, explain it now.
yeah, go ahead and explain.
Okay.
So the grading and clearing permit, Yelm does not currently have a standalone grading and clearing permit. That means that for us to look at the grading and clearing for any proposal on a site, it would have to be as part of our regular site plan review or a subdivision review. So this would add a new type of permit called a grading and clearing permit for anyone that wants to do some clearing and grading on their property. They, let's say they don't have a planned subdivision going in or a planned new commercial development, something like that. So just to do the clearing and grading. This is kind of a common permit, I think, for other areas. Yelm doesn't have one now. But it would apply in the following, I'd say about 6 different scenarios. Earthwork, 50 cubic yards or more, clearing of 3,000 square feet of land area or more, removal of more than 6 significant trees from any property, clearing, grading, or other disturbing activity within a critical area, change of the existing grade by 4 feet or more, and development that creates new impervious surfaces over 1,500 square feet in size. So those are the kind of situations that would require the clearing and grading permit. And it's really a way for the city to be able to determine that if there's a big clearing project going on, they're not doing it in some critical area with some protected trees, let's say, or if they're grading, moving a whole bunch of dirt somewhere, they're not dumping it in a wetland or other critical area. It would be a way for us to look at that as its own kind of project, not attached to any other sort of land project on the same site.
Is this just strictly for within city limits, or does this include the UGA?
This would be just the city limits.
Okay, is there an estimated, I don't know if, is there an estimated amount of additional income for the city? Do you know?
Not that I'm aware of. It would be $150 permit application fee.
It's less about income or revenue, and more about making sure that we know where things are coming and going, preventing fill to be dropped in a wetland, for instance, and, or next to a sidewalk in a street where it could, the fill could crash down on people or get all over the road or sidewalk.
Understand? Yeah.
Was the language taken from any other jurisdiction? Do you know?
I'm actually not sure.
Our city engineer, Reza, was kind of the lead on that. He's off today, so we are presenting on his behalf. But I'm assuming that the language wasn't totally created for him, but
Yeah, the whole 6 significant trees from the property, I don't think that's defined anywhere, so.
I think a significant tree is anything with over 6 inches in
I think
diameter.
it's defined elsewhere, okay, as long as, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Is this I'm kind of thinking this is probably, I do a lot of building out in the county more than I do in the city. And so, when it comes to your 50 yards. Anyway, let me just put it a different way. There's part of the process when we go through a county permit, you have to go and do a presentation. And the first thing that happens, it goes through development review. So you have to present your project, and then that dictates how we're going to go through with the process as far as whether you're going to have 50 yards, 100 yards, is it going to be permitted, or is there critical areas, wetlands, etc. So I'm kind of assuming that's where you're wanting to go with kind of the same format.
Yeah, do you have a?
yeah, similar to the same format. This isn't a permit that comes up very often, where somebody wants to clear or grade. But right now we don't really have a process if somebody wanted to account for that or have any idea of what's going on there.
Yeah.
So mainly just so we're in the know, and ensuring it's not, providing a dangerous or an environmental concern.
Okay, so like there's clearing and dirt movement on Railway Road for 85 houses going in.
That would have been part of the subdivision application.
Okay,
Because it's
so
attached
we
to
were
it.
able to look at that, because there's another one over off of Grove Road, just before you get to Canal with 75 more homes. And then there's 14 houses going in right across from Longmire Court. Or
All those-
right there.
Yeah, it wouldn't affect those projects because we already have to have a clearing and grading plan for those.
There's dirt coming out of there pretty fast, cause I've been trying to get my hands on some of it.
So projects that don't have another permit attached to it.
Okay, so was there anything further on the grading and clearing review?
Yeah, nothing further from me, no.
Okay, close the hearing at 5:25 PM. Is there a motion for approval?
Second. Oh, I'll make the motion.
Second? Is there a second on the?
A
I'll
second on the
second.
motion? What, did you say a second, John?
Yes, I said second.
Okay,
Okay, are there, okay, that concludes the, oh yeah, all in favor?
All right.
aye.
Aye.
Can abstain. I don't know enough, so can abstain.
Okay, any nay? Oh, okay, motion carried. Are there any subcommittee reports? Andy, have anything on parks?
Not much today. I was at the park meeting this morning. We're continuing on to working with the Longmire fields and improving those fields and trying to expand the ball field if we can. And so they're working with some consultants on that. And we're within about, let me see, they said we're a few weeks in to a 4-week process to get approval to move forward with the bids on going across the river on the bridge. So we already have the funding. It's grant funding that's been already given, but it's a matter of getting this approval on a permit that allows us to not drop anything in the river when we go and work on the bridge. And I could describe what the process is going to be for the bridge. It's just it's precast concrete that'll be in large planks, large panels, I guess you'd call them panels, that will be laid down on top of the current bridge structure. And then we'll expand the trail to Pierce County. But there'll have to be another phase done by Pierce County to go all the way to Roy. It's in collaboration with Pierce County to make that part of the trail paved. So we should have that work done on the bridge by the end of summer, maybe. It's always maybe when you're trying to do construction out there.
All right, thank you, Ann. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, all in favor?
All right.
Aye.
All right, motion carried. Thank you. Have a good